You may begin whenever you are ready. Thank you.
Okay, I want to start my presentation today with a quote. It's not for the Indian part. I do have white blood. I would be doing it to find out what kind of white blood. Not even for the Indian part, sorry. But definitely not for the Indian part of it. I know about that part. Who knows? Maybe I'm part Jewish or something. Have you or someone you know ever questioned their hair color, eye color, or skin pigmentation? I was one of those natives questioning my light brown hair with a red tint in the light. In 2020, two events led me to getting a DNA test done. One, I got the COVID-19 stimulus checks and wanted to use the extra money for opportunities I wouldn't have been able to afford otherwise. And two, my loving father made his journey home, along with his stories and knowledge. Historically, the Fort Apache military post brought a lot of white settlers onto the White Mountain Apache Reservation in Arizona. But there was also a lot of raiding and warfare against our Mexican neighbors. Additionally, Apache Navajos used to be one tribe living in the Alaska-Canada territory that relocated down to the southwest for unknown reasons. Aside from finding out what other ancestries would show up in my DNA composition, I wanted to know if anything in my report would correlate with any of my tribal history. The conflict between Western science and indigenous communities is distinct. In earlier history, indigenous people were exposed to genocide through various ways, such as purposeful smallpox, forced isolation in infectious villages, forced sterilizations, and not being allowed to participate in their traditional means of getting food, as well as ceremonies. Indigenous knowledge systems are often challenged by Western science. Some Native Americans fear that genetic ancestry testing results, GAD, may overthrow or chip away traditional leadership councils, community values, and family relations, such as adopted relatives. These are concerns that modern individuals will give it more credibility than what their tribal traditions say. And adoption is very common in a lot of our Native history, which I did. I wanted to include some examples of some messages I got from people I shared DNA genetic markers with. My mother told me the story. Her great-grandmother was Apache. Two sisters were taken from Apache country, one older sister and one younger sister. The older one died from depression, the younger sister thrived, and she became her great-grandmother. She was adopted by the Navajos. And I had another relative saying, I was adopted when I was a baby. My mother told me I was from the same Carlos tribe. I'm trying to find my bio father, but it seems impossible. So it's just kind of a sense of how that's still going on today, and there's still people out there. So ancestral knowledge was passed down through communities, stories, with connections to the people, the land, and our ancestors. Being Native is built on lived experiences, not on shared genetic markers. There will always be a genetics versus culture when it comes to GAT and Native communities. GAT may produce some knowledge, but it doesn't produce being Native. Other problems associated with natives and genetic ancestry testing, the results can mangle someone's self-identity or disrupt a family secret. For example, I had a first cousin message me asking if she knew how I was her cousin, and that kind of was blindsided for me. But to shorten the story, I found out she was born in the late 1970s, and she was my uncle's. And I just kind of left it at that because, I wasn't even around then. And the BIA does not keep any type of database on Native Americans. There is zero genealogical information on individuals. Therefore, no public genealogical research has been done. No individual records are kept by them. The only problem I see with this is that if we had a database, our chances of finding lost or stolen relatives would go up. And we would have more power in that because we would be running it. One of the greatest benefits through this whole little family searching was it kind of provided like a peek into my ancestors' lives. It provided some answers for some of our lost relatives that were severed from our tribes through forced relocation, enslavement, or genocide. And I actually, on 23andMe, there's an option where you can see your relatives on a map, so they're just kind of like little dots there. Looking through it all, I did find a relative at the end of Florida, and out of curiosity, I messaged her, and she told me she was from Guatemala. Her grandparents were from Guatemala. And what stuck out to me first was finding out her DNA composition. She's 92% indigenous and only 7% European. And then she messaged me some quotes. I know I have a lot of Native American in me, but I don't think my parents know of any connection to a tribe. We are Guatemalan. I, on the other hand, only know about my parents and not much about my grandparents. From each side, I've never met them. How can someone who is 92% Native not know that they're Native? I looked at some historical possibilities. I was wondering, was it during the Mexican Apache raids and she slowly made her way down that way? Or was it during the time when on Fort Sill, when Apaches were relocated to Oklahoma and Florida? Because I do know some Florida Apaches got sent to Cuba. So there's a lot of who knows. In a study done in Oklahoma with various community leaders, some natives expressed curiosity that GAT could potentially identify health risks. This is something that is still getting looked into, and there hasn't been much research, especially on reservations yet. Whether it's for a family or a community as a whole, I am also hopeful. And it can trace unknown ancestry, identifying non-native links. Unexpected findings would be interesting and possibly entertaining. I just have a little list of mine simplified. I'm 74% Southwest Native, 20% Asian, and 6% unassigned, which we all kind of know what that means. For enrolled and aware tribal members, many believe GAT wouldn't affect what they already know to be true about their identities, communities, and tribal affiliation, myself included. For my GAT results in family tree building, I was able to find some distant relatives that were up in the Canada-Alaska area. And this is actually a screenshot of the map I was telling you about on 23andMe. So I'm just thinking, I haven't even talked with these people yet, but it's exciting to kind of know that there's a possibility there. I found out my fourth great grandpa was Chief Mangus Coloradus. Historically, he was involved in the Apache-Mexican Wars where they stole cattle and people from each other. So when I looked at one of his census rolls, he had a long list, and some of them were Mexican kids' names. Oh, no. So I was just like, Grandpa, take them back. But and two of his son-in-laws were Chief Pedro Pino and Chief Cochise, who are affiliated with the Mescalero and Chiricahua Apache tribes. So that just kind of shows that they're not Mexican Apache Wars. It was just a mix of people before they were separated into other states. So the way I started was starting with what I knew, just from what I was told, which wasn't too much. And I started asking relatives around, and I started to hear at tribes, and I found out we have access to Ancestry through our library. So one of the librarians helped me get started with that, and yeah, and it just kind of snowballed from there. You can also start building your own family tree using tree building sites. I did use one called FamilySearch.org, and they're a nonprofit organization with a website offering genealogical records for education and software. It's run by the LDS system, which kind of works out because they were part of the relocation and the adoption, so they do have some of those files firsthand. If I were ever given the opportunity to take a DNA test, or if you were given the opportunity to take a DNA test, I would recommend taking it, but only if you want. Two of the most common would be Ancestry and 23andMe. Regardless of choosing one or both, you will find out more about your family. It brought connections with other people, untold stories from hidden family members, and more respect for my ancestors. I did this in memory of my dad, whom I wish I got to share some of these pictures with. I encourage you all to dip into it a little, especially while our elders are still with us. Our own kids or future generations will probably ask us about it. We need to prepare our answers a little. Thank you. Michelle.